Are you a brand new podcaster, hoping to share what you're passionate about to whoever's willing to listen, but you aren't sure where to start? Navigating the logistics of your podcast can be confusing, from tracking growth to getting your podcast on the biggest platforms like Apple and Spotify. That's why I use Captivate. Captivate is a podcast publishing site that's user-friendly and offers everything you need to fulfill your podcast's full potential. They'll help you publish your podcast to all of the most popular platforms, as well as help you track your growth through daily, weekly, 28, and 90-day download numbers, as well as the averages, so you can see where your podcast might be flourishing or floundering. What's more, they'll help you with promotion and advertising. They offer free courses on how to start and run the perfect podcast, and they even throw in a free website with your subscription, completely customizable to fit your podcast's personality. You can sign up now starting at $19 a month, and you'll even get a free 7-day trial so you can decide whether or not it's right for you. Sign up today at thezoologist.net/captivate, and what's more, you'll be supporting my show. Captivate truly is a podcaster's best friend. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Zoologist Podcast. I'm your host Jake, and today we'll be learning more facts and hearing more stories about some of the amazing animals that walk our planet today. As always, let's get ready to get wild. In today's episode, we'll be learning all about rhinos, the second largest land animals and one of the few mega herbivores still walking the earth today. Rhinos are also one of the most endangered animals on Earth, so today, as well as learning more about these magnificent creatures, we'll explore why they're so threatened, what's being done to save them, and how you can get involved. Let's dive in. Thank you so much for hopping on today, wherever you are in the world, whenever you're listening to this. As of this episode, The Zoologist is officially over a month old, a big milestone. Pretty exciting for this podcast. If you're a new listener tuning in for the first time and you're curious to know what we're all about, once this episode is finished, go ahead and visit our website at thezoologist.net. You can learn more about our podcast. But for now, sit back, relax, and get ready to learn a little bit more about the animal kingdom. Same goes for those of you who have listened before. Welcome back, and thank you for hopping on again. Now, today's episode is all about the rhinoceros. Rhinos are really, really cool animals. They're definitely really cool-looking animals. They look like living tanks wandering around the African savanna or the jungles of Southeast Asia. It probably won't surprise you to know that they're one of the oldest mammals on Earth. Their ancestors have been around for millions of years, covering a range that includes North America, Europe, Africa, Asia. I do feel like they're kind of a misunderstood animal. They seem to have a reputation for being kind of stupid, definitely for being very aggressive, like they're walking around looking to pick fights. The truth is, rhinos are actually quite intelligent creatures, and while they can be unpredictable, they're really only aggressive if they feel threatened. They're actually quite shy, and they prefer to avoid contact with human beings if they can. One thing that no one is misunderstanding, however, is that rhinos are extremely endangered. Of the 5 currently living species of rhino, 3 are listed as critically endangered by the IUCN. The other 2 are either vulnerable or near threatened. To kind of put it in perspective, consider the fact that at the start of the 20th century, there were 500,000 rhinos left between Africa and Asia. Today, there are less than 30,000, and that's with all 5 species combined. Today, I want to talk about why they're so threatened, why rhino numbers have been in decline over the past century plus, as well as what's being done to save them, and what you can do to get involved if you'd like. But first, before we talk about rhino conservation, I want to share more about these incredible animals themselves, just to hopefully give you a little bit more appreciation for these incredible creatures. The term rhinoceros is actually a combination of 2 Greek words, rhino meaning nose and ceros meaning horn, which is appropriate for these creatures. Like I've already mentioned, there are 5 species of rhino currently living. The white rhinoceros and the black rhinoceros are both native to Africa, and then the greater one-horned rhinoceros, which is also known as the Indian rhinoceros, the Javan rhinoceros, and the Sumatran rhinoceros are all native to Asia. The 2 species of African rhino are actually pretty similar in appearance. Despite their names, they're both the same color. They're both grayish-brown. What actually distinguishes them is their size and their lips. White rhinos are bigger than black rhinos. They typically weigh between 3,000 and 5,000 pounds. although some of them can weigh as much as 8,000 pounds, which is 3,600 kilograms for all you metric system users out there. They also stand between 5 and 6 feet tall at the shoulder, or about 1.5 to 1.8 meters tall. Black rhinos, on the other hand, stand just over 5 feet tall on average, and they usually weigh between about 1,700 and 3,000 pounds, or 770 and about 1,300 kilograms. As for their lips, the shape of these rhinos' lips is a reflection of their preferred diet, actually. White rhinos have broad upper lips. These are better for grazing, better for eating grass, while black rhinos actually have pointier, prehensile upper lips that are better for eating leaves and twigs. This is actually believed to be how these two species got their name. White rhino supposedly derives from the Afrikaans word for wide, which is pronounced weid. It's said that English settlers or explorers, someone mistook the word for the word white, so they started calling that rhino the white rhino. To differentiate between the two species, they called the other rhino black rhinos. Asian rhinos generally look pretty different from their African cousins. The greater one-horned rhino and the Javan rhino have more skin folds, makes them look like they're wearing suits of armor. And then the Sumatran rhinoceros is actually covered in a coat of hair, a very thin coat of hair, but a coat of hair nonetheless. As it turns out, they're actually more closely related to the extinct woolly rhinoceros than any other currently living rhino species. All 5 species of rhino are quite large. In fact, they're the second largest land animals after the elephant. White rhinos and greater one-horns are the 2 biggest species, while the Sumatran rhino is the smallest. They usually only stand between about 3.3 feet and 5 feet tall on average, and they weigh between 1,000 and 2,000 pounds, or 500 and 900 kilograms. Like I've mentioned, rhinos and their ancestors have historically covered a massive range. They used to be found across 4 continents. Even the 5 species currently living used to be found in a range that included all of eastern and southern Africa. They could be found across the Indian subcontinent in Nepal, Pakistan, and India. They can be found in Southeast Asia and Vietnam and Indonesia. Today, with their numbers being so low, their ranges are naturally much, much smaller. In fact, 96% of Africa's rhinos can be found between 4 countries: Namibia, Zimbabwe, Kenya, and South Africa. And most of Asia's rhinos can be found in a stretch of habitat that includes India, Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh. And then there are a couple of tiny populations left in protected areas of Indonesia. South Africa in particular actually has the largest population of rhinos on Earth, over 15,000, including half the world's black rhinos and the vast majority of its white rhinos. As for their habitats, rhinos can be found in a variety of different ecosystems. African rhinos are found on savannas and deserts in sub-Saharan Africa, while Asian rhinos can usually be found roaming grasslands or wandering around tropical rainforests. They're herbivores. In fact, rhinos are one of the few mega-herbivores left today. Mega-herbivore is a term referencing any plant-eating animal that weighs over 1,000 kilograms. Elephants and hippos are an example of this. In a past era of Earth's history, huge mega-herbivores like giant ground sloths and woolly mammoths used to roam the Earth. Today there are very few left, and rhinos are one of them. They are relics from a bygone era of Earth's history. The most noticeable and famous feature of any rhinoceros is its horn, or horns, depending on the species. 3 rhino species, the black, white, and Sumatran rhino, all have 2 horns, and then the greater one-horned, obviously, and the Javan rhinoceros both have 1 horn. These horns, they actually aren't made of bone, and they're not even attached to the skull even. They're actually made of keratin, which is the same substance that makes up our hair and fingernails. These horns will grow throughout a rhino's life. They can grow up to 4 inches in a year, and the longest rhino horn ever recorded was 5 feet. That's not a rhino I would want to mess with. Rhinos have several uses for their horns. They'll use them to dig for water. They'll use them to forage for food. Asian rhinos will use them to protect their head when they're walking through thick jungle vegetation. African rhinos will use them for defense. They'll also use them to fight other rhinos, like when they're defending territory or fighting for mates. When they want to avoid a fight, they'll also use their horns for defensive posturing, I guess just to show off. Asian rhinos actually don't use them for defense or to fight off other rhinos. What they do is they actually use canines or tusks, I guess you could call them, to slash at their enemies or potential threats, which is a little unconventional, not what you would expect from a rhinoceros. Alrighty, I think this is a good place to take a break. We will continue our discussion about the rhinoceros right after this. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back as we continue our discussion about rhinos. Now, rhinos are usually solitary creatures. Mostly they live alone. There are exceptions to this, of course. White rhinos can actually be quite social, and females will form social groups of up to 15 individuals. By the way, a group of rhinos is called a crash, which was an excellent choice for the term. A crash of rhinos is really fun to say. Other rhino species will also occasionally gather together, maybe when they're feeding or when they're at watering holes. But for the most part, rhinos generally live alone. This doesn't stop them, however, from using a wide range of calls and vocalizations to communicate with one another. They have different calls for different situations. For example, they will growl in confrontations. They'll snort when they're angry. They'll even scream when they're scared, which I imagine would be a horrifying sound. Rhinos, like elephants, also communicate with each other using infrasonic frequencies, too low for humans to be able to hear, which is a testament to the excellent hearing that rhinos have. White rhinos, being more social than other rhino species, naturally have a wider range of vocalizations than other species of rhinoceros. There's even evidence that they can tell each other apart by their calls. From another white rhino's call, they can distinguish age, sex, and social status. All rhinos also communicate through scent. Specifically, rhinos will use dung and urine to mark their territories. From the scent of another rhino's excrement, they can figure out what other rhinos might be nearby. And this is important because all rhino species are extremely territorial, some more than others. Greater one-horns, for example, will fight violently over their territories, sometimes to the death. Meanwhile, Javan and Sumatran rhinos, while they are territorial and they do have territories, they seem to be a lot more laid back about it. Other ways that rhinos will mark their territories is through, I think Javan rhinos have scent glands on their feet that they'll scrape against the ground, and black rhinos have scent glands on their heads or on their skin that they'll rub against trees or other objects. Now, I'll say it again. I said it before, I'll say it again. Rhinos are really cool-looking animals, and it just so happens that their babies are really adorable as well. If you've ever seen a video of a baby rhinoceros, you know what I'm talking about. They are super, super cute. They're very playful, very inquisitive. Female rhinos are the ones who raise the young. Their pregnancies will usually last anywhere between 14 and 19 months, depending on the species. When the calf is born, it already tips the scale at about 100 pounds. So a pretty big baby. Females will raise their calf for about 4 years or until she has another baby. If she has another baby while she still has a calf that's being raised, she will push the other calf away and force it to become independent early. Rhinos only raise one calf at a time. Sumatran rhinos will just stop raising their calves after 2 or 3 years, whether or not they have a new calf or not. So they become independent even sooner than other rhino species. I also mentioned before that rhinos are very unpredictable. They're only aggressive when they're provoked. It's believed that this is because of their poor eyesight. Their eyesight makes them more nervous. Just to give you an idea of how bad a rhino's eyesight is, if you're standing at about 100 feet away from a rhinoceros and you're not moving, they won't be able to see you. When they do notice something moving, or when they pick up something unfamiliar with their keen sense of smell or hearing, they can become spooked. And when they become spooked, this is when they're likely to charge. Some species are more likely to charge than others. Black rhinos, for example, are famous for being more aggressive and jittery, I guess you could say, than other rhino species. Meanwhile, white rhinos are more likely to run away from confrontation. In any case, I wouldn't try to provoke a rhinoceros. You're not going to get away from one, at least not if you're on foot. They can run at speeds of up to 30 miles an hour, and those collisions are violent. While I was doing my research, I saw a video of a black rhino charging into a car, and it was scary. Not something I'd want to be on the wrong end of. A few more rhino facts that are worth mentioning. Obviously, rhinos have very thick skin, but what's really cool is that it's actually quite sensitive, which I wasn't expecting. There are a lot of blood vessels that are near the surface, so it scars easily. What rhinos do to protect their sensitive skin from sun or insects is they'll roll around in mud or dust. In fact, rhinos actually really love rolling around in mud. You'll see them with dirt clods on their backs a lot of the time because they've been rolling in dirt somewhere. They also use mud to get rid of skin parasites or to cool down. The closest living relatives of the rhino are not elephants or hippos like you would expect. Like hippos, rhinos are what are called ungulates. If you don't know what an ungulate is, it's just a scientific term referring to hoofed mammals and their ancestors. It's a fun fact for you. Dolphins and whales are actually considered ungulates because their ancestors were hoofed mammals that lived on land. It's kind of your bonus fact for the day, I guess you could say. Unlike hippos, rhinos are odd-toed ungulates. So this means they're actually much more closely related to animals like horses, zebras, and tapirs. They also happen to be crucial to their environment. They keep vegetation growth in check with their foraging and their diet, and they distribute seeds with their dung, similar to how elephants do it. And then, of course, rhinos are incredibly threatened. The three rhino species listed as critically endangered are the Sumatran, Javan, and black rhinoceros. Javan and Sumatran rhinos both have population numbers under 100, and there are just over 6,000 black rhinos left in the world. The greater one-horned rhino is listed as vulnerable, and then white rhinos are considered to be near threatened. It's a really sad situation, especially when you consider how widespread these animals used to be. The Javan rhinoceros alone, for example, used to cover a range that included India, all of Southeast Asia, southern China, and Indonesia. Now the entire population can be found on a single national park on the island of Java. And by the way, this national park is right next to an active volcano and is at risk of tsunamis in the future. So not a great setup for the future of the species. Two subspecies of African rhino, meanwhile, the western black and the northern white, are now extinct in the wild. The western black is completely extinct, and the northern white is functionally extinct after the last male died recently. Black rhinos generally suffered a 96% decline in their population between the years 1970 and 1993. It all begs the question, how did we get to this point? Well, rhinos have faced two major threats to their existence, poaching and habitat loss. Poaching, in particular, has been a huge issue for decades. Rhinos are hunted for their horns, which are used in traditional Asian medicines to cure anything from cancer to fevers to hangovers. There's no scientific evidence that rhino horn has any medicinal properties, but there continues to be a huge demand, particularly in China and Vietnam. More recently, it's come to be seen as a status symbol, and in some cases, it's even used in trinkets. For example, rhino horns are sometimes made into handles for daggers. Poaching rhinos is illegal, as is the international trade of rhino horn, but there's still a huge black market demand for them. A single rhino horn can fetch as much as $250,000 US. Poaching might be done by locals. It's often done by organized criminal gangs who will track down rhinos in helicopters. They'll either shoot them with a gun or they'll hit them with a tranquilizer dart, and then what they'll do is they'll drop down, they'll remove the horns with chainsaws, and then fly away. If the rhino isn't killed during this attack, it'll often bleed to death. If you look up rhino conservation online, you'll see pictures of rhinos with gaping wounds on their snouts. It's really, really sad to see. Habitat loss is no less of a problem. As humans encroach further and further into the rhino's natural habitat, populations can be cut off from one another. This can lead to inbreeding, poor genetics. It weakens whatever populations are left, and it makes it harder for their numbers to increase. Now, there is good news as far as rhino conservation is concerned. That's the bad news. The good news is that, for one thing, there are some species that are seeing their numbers increase. The black rhino is an example of this. Their numbers have increased by 12% the past 5 years and have more than doubled since the turn of the century. They used to be at about 2,500, and now they're about just over 6,000, which is very encouraging. The greater one-horned rhino was on the brink of extinction at one point during the 20th century. Their population numbers were estimated to be under 100 individuals. Today, they're well over 3,000, and as I've already mentioned, they're now listed as vulnerable by the IUCN. The southern white rhino was almost extinct at the beginning of the 20th century, and they've made a huge comeback. They're now more numerous than any other rhino species or subspecies out there. What's more, in some places, rhino poaching seems to be on the decline. In Indonesia, for example, it's almost been completely eliminated due to the country's rhino protection units. And then in some African countries, it's declined as well. And there's evidence that poaching rates on the continent have declined overall since reaching a peak in 2015. However, in some places, the rate of poaching has increased or remained the same, so there's still work to be done. Nonetheless, these are encouraging signs, especially for an animal that's seen so much decline in its population numbers over the past 100 years or so. The next question is, what's being done to save these animals? Well, there are several ways that governments and conservation groups are working to keep rhinos from going extinct. This is a complex issue, and there are a lot of moving parts to it, so I'm going to try to simplify it as much as I can. One solution that's been proposed and tried is dehorning rhinos. Or essentially what they do is they shoot rhinos with tranquilizer darts and then they remove their horns before poachers have a chance to get to them. This works because if the horn is removed correctly, it doesn't hurt the rhino. However, this is a controversial solution for several reasons. For one thing, it's invasive to the animal. The other problem with this is that these horns that are removed are often stockpiled by people who are awaiting the potential legalization of the rhino horn trade. The problem with this is that you get theft. The stockpiling of these horns has led to thefts and has led to greater amounts of rhino horns being introduced on the black market. What's more, dehorning hasn't stopped rhinos from being poached. Poachers still track down and kill these rhinos, likely to get the stubs of the horn that remain after they've been dehorned. In some cases, they'll even just kill these rhinos as acts of revenge so they don't have to track them down again, which is beyond inhumane. Dehorning, it's only really been effective when it's been paired with tighter security measures around rhino populations, which is also something that's being done to protect rhinos, something that many conservation groups are advocating for. Since most of the planet's rhinos live on game reserves or in national parks, it's easier to impose tighter security measures than it would be with other endangered species. Some of those measures include fencing around parks, an increased and strengthened law enforcement or park ranger presence, and then there are even some national parks that will use technology to monitor animals to watch for any illegal hunting efforts. Striking at the market itself is another solution that's being pursued. Working to decrease demand for the product itself works better long term since they're attacking the root of the problem. Conservation groups like the World Wildlife Fund are lobbying for stricter enforcement of current poaching and wildlife trade laws, as well as the creation of new laws wherever it might be appropriate, wherever there might be a need. Informing consumers, increasing public awareness of the rhino's plight is also how they're trying to decrease demand. Ecotourism is a great way to do this, while also getting local communities involved. The promotion of ecotourism is something that I am all for. For one thing, it gets local communities involved. It creates jobs, creates income, it creates an incentive for these locals to participate in conservation efforts. And it also, at the same time, increases public awareness as these people come and they get to see these animals in the wild. Other solutions that are being pursued include expanding protected areas, reintroducing rhinos to historic ranges where they've gone extinct. If you personally want to get involved in rhino conservation, you have a few different options that don't include becoming a park ranger in South Africa. Among these there are several charitable organizations that you can donate to, such as the previously mentioned World Wildlife Fund. The International Rhino Foundation is another one, and then Save the Rhino International is another one that I found. Some organizations also provide the option to symbolically adopt a rhino. So if you want to make your charitable donation a little bit more personal, you can go ahead and adopt a rhino. You get information about the rhino you adopted, and you also get a certificate, which is pretty neat. You can also just buy sustainable wood, paper, palm oil products. By buying sustainable products, you can prevent rhino habitats from continuing to shrink. Well, that's a little more information for you on rhinos, why they're at risk of extinction. Hopefully you've gained a greater appreciation for these magnificent creatures and a better understanding of what they're up against. If you want to get involved in rhino conservation efforts, even in small ways, just remember that everything counts, no matter how small you feel like your contribution may be. To fill a bucket, you have to start with one drop. Thank you so much for hopping on today to learn more about the armored tanks of the animal kingdom. There's so much to learn and know when it comes to rhino conservation, so if you'd like more information, go ahead and look through the research links in the show notes. I'll also be posting a link to an article that lists charitable organizations working towards saving the rhinoceros, so if you'd like to donate and get involved, go ahead and look through that as well. Just know that none of these organizations are involved with the Zoologist Podcast in any way. If you liked what you heard, or even if you didn't, go ahead and give us a rating on Podchaser or wherever you listen to podcasts. I always appreciate the feedback, and I'm always looking for ways to improve the show. Thanks again for listening, and as always, have a wild day.